I want to talk about what really creates a sustainable marriage, and that is the balance of power and importance. I don't want to just have another conversation about marriage.
There's been a lot of talk going around about the benefits of marriage and that men tend to benefit in a marriage more than women. So, how can women increase the benefits of marriage and create marriages that are more sustainable? So, welcome to the Seven Exits podcast with Dr. Rosenna Bakari, our favorite empowerment psychologist, is really going to tackle this question. So, Dr. Bakari, how are you today, and what are your thoughts on this subject in the research? Yeah.
So I'm excited. It's always good to be here and to indulge in such critical conversations with you, Dr. Singleton. This is interesting because I've been hearing a lot of videos lately about how women do not benefit as much from marriage as men do. While I think it can be some interesting knowledge for women to take in, I also get a little bit concerned, particularly as a woman who's been married for 34 years, that women don't get the idea, or men don't get the idea, that marriage shouldn't exist for them, that marriage shouldn't be an option for them, or that they should stop looking for that ultimate love. And so I thought it was important for us to have some conversation around this. And so I'm ready to dig into it. I have some ideas of my own. So let's chat.
And that's exactly what we want to hear. Definitely your ideas about this, because I know earlier we talked about, there's a lot of talk about the different benefits, and you basically said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you basically said, like, we need to really go beyond that conversation, right? About this benefit or that benefit. We don't just want to go through a laundry list of benefits, because you said ultimately there are two things that we really need to be concerned about. So you can, just let us have it. What are those two things? And, go for it.
Right. So when we were in conversation earlier about this, and what I think is worthy to focus this topic on today, is this concept not of benefits, because benefits vary according to many things that I bring into it, according to my ability to work, how many children I have, race and gender, etc. But two constructs in a relationship, specifically in a marriage, I think are super duper important in terms of providing or predicting the sustainability of a marriage. One is power, and two is importance. How power and importance, those two constructs, show up in a relationship is, I think, what determines if that relationship is sustainable and whether or not you will reap the benefits of it. So one of the things that happens, why I think men benefit more ultimately, is because in many, many relationships, men have imbalance of power and importance. So that means they often have a lot of power in a relationship compared to their spouse, and they also have a lot of importance in their relationship compared to their spouse. So when men in that marriage have the greater share of power and importance, then it's really easy for the spouse to feel disempowered. When I start to feel too disempowered, I'm out. 70% of divorces are initiated by the wife. So it's interesting that women tend to generally be more interested in marriage, but apparently we are also more interested in divorce. So how do we create marriages that are sustainable and beneficial is worth talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And I want you to get into power, right? Because sometimes when people hear power in a relationship, like, that lands kind of negatively for some people, like power. Why should this be about power? So when you talk about power, what exactly are you talking about in power in the marriage?
Sure. Power anywhere is the ability to influence decisions, set priorities, and control resources, whether you're in a marriage, at job, or anywhere else. How, of course, power is important. Now, I often, I'm the empowerment expert. Power is a subset of empowerment. And so in any relationship, you want to be able to influence decisions. You want to be able to set some priorities. You want to be able to control some of those resources. That's power. And so when men, because they've been traditionally the breadwinners in a family, some marriages have been set up where they then control all the resources, set the priorities, and influence in a larger way all the decisions. And so thus they execute more power in that relationship in a way that creates an imbalance between them and their spouse.
And so now the importance, it seems like that's definitely related. It seems like if you have more power, then your opinions or whatever are going to seem more important.
So let's talk about importance then. Importance, I define as the felt sense of valued, being respected and being cherished, regardless of who holds the power. Regardless, even if you're the decision maker, do I feel valued, respected, and cherished in this relationship? That's the importance. So whatever is going on in a relationship, one of these two things is the problem, or the use of these two tools and resources or constructs is the problem. Someone is feeling disempowered. Someone is feeling unimportant.
Okay, so in your experience and in your practice, how do people then, how is the best way for people to go about balancing power?
Giving language to it. And I'm big on that, right? The whole 7 Exits book, right? If you haven't gotten the 7 Exits book, make sure you do that, because there's one really giving language to what it is that we are experiencing. And so we talk so much in relationships, in the relationship realm, about expectations and what I'm owed and what my worth is. And really what we're trying to get at is power and importance. How are we approaching power and importance in this relationship? And so when we look at the conflict and we begin to see it from a way of, because when we say, you disrespect me, well, you should give equally too, and blah, blah, it doesn't work. Trying to say that everybody shares the dishwashing isn't necessarily power or importance, right? It's a good way to create conflict when you tell me that everything you do, I have to do too. That's a good way to create conflict, because we haven't had an honest, genuine discussion on power and importance. So one, giving language to the conversation beyond what I feel, what I want, what my expectations are versus your expectations. So if we talk about these two constructs, then we can talk about how they play out in this relationship for me and for you, versus your expectations are going to be different than my expectations.
Okay, but then how do people shift from that, right? Because that's what a lot of us are used to doing. It's like, hey, this is my expectation, or I do this and I do this and I do this and I'm overwhelmed, like whatever it is, right? So how do people even shift from that if that's where you've been?
So that's why the language is important. So now imagine, she's like, well, I expect you to do the dishes too. I work too. I expect. So now imagine shifting from I expect to what my sense of power feels like and what my sense of importance feels like when certain things occur in the relationship. Now we're both using the same language for one thing. So how do I perceive you using your power? how do I perceive myself using power? So if we can begin to change by simply shifting our language in a way that detaches us slightly enough from emotion so that we can both see the same thing. But when you want me to take over or understand your emotion, that's hard for me. But if we can come together and create a language, then I'm closer to understanding what it is that you're wanting or I'm wanting out of it. So here is an example. If I am feeling disempowered in this relationship because I don't bring money in, one of the things that start to happen is that the more disempowered I feel, the more I struggle for importance. What does that mean? That means I become more demanding of your demonstration of respect and cherishing me. Because if you're not going to share power, you must then now increase my level of value, my importance. You have to give one. We start to struggle there. Right? One of the reasons we've been married for 34 years with relative ease, we've had our challenging years, but right off, I left my job to follow my husband, and that was an issue. At the time, I was making more money than him, and I left my job, left my family, moved halfway across the country to be with this man. It was always really clear to us the power that I was giving up to be with him, because we didn't use those words at that time, but because he understood that, he was really sensitive to making sure that I felt a sense of power in that relationship. So for decades, every cent he earned, he brought home for me to do with it what I needed to do with it. So even though I couldn't earn the money, I controlled the money. And that's for decades, that's how it worked for us. So there was a sharing of power and importance. So even though I felt very important from the children, it was also really important. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes in this podcast, I hope. It was also really important that he felt a sense of importance with these children, not just me. So I didn't tell him to help take care of the babies because that was his responsibility. And he knew to do that because he understood the sense of importance it gave me to connect with his children. He also wanted to share in that sense of importance. Okay. So we've always had a really good balance in our relationship between power and importance.
Thank you for that example. Got it. Because in the beginning, I'm like, okay, this is a little too abstract for me.
Okay.
It's like, okay, some examples. That's why I was like, okay, how do you shift from that? But okay, I think that, now I really see it now, because, and that is a common example that you gave, where one person gets a position someplace and then the other person is willing to give up their position, their career, whatever is happening in their career, and go with this person. So, okay, then how do you negotiate that so one person is not feeling resentful and
Absolutely. So then bitterness comes up because it's like, well, now you have the power and you have the importance. You have the other partner who receives that compromise has to see it, has to understand it. And the two of you have to figure out a way to start leveling it back out so that other partner feels a sense of power and importance as well. You can't maintain that imbalance. You have to understand it. Both people have to feel a sense of power and importance.
Okay, so the first one I want to go back to is when you mentioned that before this move, you were making more money than your husband. And so how did you two, under those circumstances, negotiate power and importance? Because this is another thing, right? This is another common example where some women, a lot of wives are making more money than their husbands. And then there's this whole, because we have these whole, roles that we have for people that the man is supposed to be making more, whatever. So for people who are in that situation and that may be causing some tension, how do you get that balance of power and importance?
You negotiate it. Marriage is not, you should know how I feel. Everything is a negotiation. Mm. You have to be able to negotiate for yourself in a relationship. This has been 34 years of pure negotiation between my husband and me. We often have different needs, and you must learn how to negotiate power and importance. If you understand that what you're negotiating is power and importance, it's easier to get on track instead of trying to have this list of do's and don'ts and wants and da-da-da-da-da. Power and importance. So every time my husband got another job, it meant another move for us, right? Mm-hmm. In order to subsidize that power and importance, that meant he had to ask me where we could move, if it was okay to move, when we could move. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because that was important to have the balance of power and importance. He couldn't just leave and go, oh, got another job in Kentucky, here we go. No. Right. So before he even job searched, he would ask, we would have conversations around what that would look like, that would make me okay, so that it was always us looking for a job, not him looking for a job.
Mm-hmm. And that's a big difference.
Big difference.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. Big difference. So again, everything is about negotiation. It was never, so people say, oh, you just follow your husband. Yes, I follow us. I didn't just follow my husband. I follow us. I agreed that that was a level of power and importance I was willing to acquiesce to. I wasn't pulled along, I was negotiated along.
Negotiation. Is that something that we as women really need to work on?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Because if we accept the word negotiation, it will allow us perhaps to relinquish expectation. We have a whole world up here of expectations that we call common sense, which isn't common sense. Or we say, if you loved us, you should know these things, but people don't. So you have to get used to using your words and your voice to negotiate, and understand that negotiations sometimes end in a yes, and sometimes they end in a no. That's why it's a negotiation. It's not a value of my love for you. It's not what I think of the marriage. It's negotiation.
And this goes for men too. I mean, I know I framed it like, do you think we as women are not good negotiations? But that goes across the board, right? Like all of us could really, a lot of times, really learn how to negotiate and really express what our what our needs are at that time, right? Like you said, like before, you guys would move, there was this discussion about, hey, was this going to work for y'all? As a unit, not just, it's just going to work for me, I'm going to make more money, or this is going to advance my career, whatever. Hey, is this going to work for us?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so now when you have children in the mix, because then there's some other negotiations, there's a whole other set, right, of negotiations that need to be made as well.
And that's why the negotiation is so important. And that's why power and importance are two critical concepts to understand in a relationship, because power and importance, how they look in your marriage, always shifting, always shifting. Mm-hmm. I had no idea how much I would want to be a stay-at-home mother. I I'd never been a mother before. I didn't know. So once I had children, my whole world centered around my children. But what if that had never happened because I was like, no, I'm not having children. That's my power. I don't know. That was something that we negotiated and decided on, right?
Mhm.
And so then, but if I had said, no, I'm going to be a career woman and make my money too, I would not have had that opportunity. So then again, balance of power and importance shifted again, and it shifts as they get into different stages. You're always negotiating the balance of power and importance.
You know, it seems like a lot of marriages struggle when the children come along because somebody may feel that, okay, where I had importance, that's now shifted over to the children, and now I don't feel important. Even if I do have the power still, I don't feel important. I feel neglected, like, you know, whatever it is. So, okay, help us out with that now. Yeah.
Yes. So imagine this scenario, right? You have this husband and this wife, and we're talking about traditional heterosexual relationships because this whole conversation looks a little bit different when you're in same-sex relationships. There are some things that are similar, but there are different concepts and constructs as to how things show up. So we are intentionally talking about heterosexual relationships in terms of marriage. And so imagine this husband who wants these children, right? And the children show up. And now, because before the children, he may have had the power and the importance. Now the children show up, the whole construct of power and importance shifts in that relationship. So now, if I'm a woman, if I'm the wife, I have a whole lot of importance to those children. So any imbalance that existed in that relationship, I will now cling to and use and hoard my importance with the children to shift that balance. And that's why that's one of the reasons you see a lot of conflict that arises after children. Because women often cling to the importance that they get from their children that they were not getting in that relationship with their spouse. That becomes problematic, and it can create a lot of conflict. And so mothers can become overbearing because they're clinging to that sense of importance. Men may still hoard the power, but now we have a conflict between power and importance in that family. And so now if the husband's importance in that family declines, he may begin to cling to the power he gets from his wallet. So yeah, now work is more important. That's power. And so then this ugly cycle begins, this invisible cycle between power and importance that people don't know how to articulate. So we talk about in terms of expectations and love language and because they don't understand what's happening in their relationship, power and importance.
Okay, so now you're in it. Okay.
You're in it.
You in it now. Okay, there was always an imbalance of power and importance. The children come along. Now you're the mother, and now you're like, okay, this is this importance, but now it's starting all of this conflict here. How do you get back to some time? Well, the relationship wasn't there to begin with, right? Because there was balance. So how do you get there from there? Because that just becomes, it seems like that's just a hole you could just keep falling down.
You absolutely can keep falling down. And so having conversations around power and importance can get you further than having conversations around expectations and love language. Again, it's harder for me to relate to is your wants versus my wants. But if you're having a conversation around what do we really want this family to look like in the way where we both feel really significant and we both feel really in control of what's happening here.
So, all right, in my mind, for somebody to sit down and have that conversation, there has to be such a level of awareness, right? That there is an imbalance. So what are some type of phrases or keywords or things that people say that can let you know that, okay, this is about power and importance, right? Because people don't say, well, I don't feel power, right? That's not the language we have right now, right?
Right.
So what are some of the things that people will say in a marriage when there really needs to be a rebalancing?
They won't say anything. They'll do that. And that's part of the challenge when we don't have the language. They'll do. Right? Especially sometimes, especially particularly husbands, because while the wife is home reading the 5 love languages and stuff like that, she's maybe developing some language. She's not reading anything. They're getting further apart because now the knowledge of what's happening may be an imbalance too. Simply ask this question. Forget all the books and everything. Just have a conversation and simply ask 2 questions to each other. If you're having any difficulty, anybody who's having any difficulty in your relationship right now, ask these 2 questions of each other. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much power do you feel like you have in this relationship? That's the first question. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much importance do you feel like you have in this relationship? Where are you on those 2 scales? That's an objective way to begin a conversation where both people put down their numbers and then have a discussion about the numbers, not about how I feel and what you did and da da da. And then the next question could be, where would you like to be? Where would you like to be? So you feel like you have importance in this relationship, but you don't feel like you have power. I feel like I don't have power or importance, and I bring in all the money. What then you're talking about what you want it to look like versus who you are versus who I am. Because that's when people get so caught up in, you don't understand me, you disrespect me. Well, I can't understand what's in your head. You're right. But I can understand when we talk about these 2 things that we're now using the same scale for. We're using the same language. Even if your idea of power is different from my idea of power, what I understand is that you feel like you don't have any. It's a 3. And then we can talk about what would it look like if it's a 7. And when you start telling me, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, then we have a different problem to work on. Because now you're expecting me to work out and figure out what's going to feed you. I don't know. It's a more objective conversation. But what happens is that people start throwing mud at each other about what you do and don't do and how you make me feel. But you can't sustain a marriage like that.
Okay, so for people who may be just joining, please go over again. When you say power, what exactly are you talking about? And when you say importance, what exactly does that mean?
Right. So power, you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much power do you feel like you have in this marriage? Your ability to influence decisions, set priorities, or control resources. How much power do you have? Importance. On a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you feel? What is your sense of being valued, respected, and cherished in this relationship?
Okay, yeah, I thought that was important for us to really go over again for people who have written down those questions and are trying to have these discussions, okay? The other part that you talked about was, okay, we're asking the question. And somebody says, well, okay, What would it look like for you at a 7?
Right.
And they say, I don't know. And I'm sure that's an answer a lot of people give, and I'm not, I'm not really trying to be funny here. It's not funny, but this is really an answer that I could see a lot of people give. Like, man, I never really thought about that. Like, I have the complaints. Like you said, I have the complaints, I have my feelings, I have that, but I don't really know what that would look like at that point, because that's still information. We're not trying to slam anybody, right? That's still information that you don't know. Now, what is that person's next step?
So if you don't know how to get where you want to be, what that indicates, perhaps, is that you are overly relying on your partner to make you feel something instead of you doing the work. So if you don't know, that means you have to spend a lot more time doing the inner work. And oftentimes, by the time you do the inner work, you don't need your partner to do anything else. But oftentimes, this is where the conflict begins. We're expecting our partner to pour something into us that we don't even know what it is.
Okay, so now you had questions for the spouses, right? So now the spouse has already said, yeah, I don't know. What are the questions that that person needs to ask themselves?
So you can ask yourself, what is my expectation of a marriage that's not being fulfilled right now? Where did I get that expectation from?
Okay,
And
so
if that
question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And in order for my spouse to fulfill that particular expectation, what might need to be sacrificed? Because oftentimes we want something in without anything going out. And it doesn't work that way. What am I willing to sacrifice to get that? Well, you're never home. You don't get, okay, I can be home more, but that means because I'm a salesperson, or that means that we're going to have less income coming in. That's going to create a different kind of problem. Or that means that my mama going to have to move in with us because I can't go and spend the 3 hours every weekend taking care of her. That means, so in order for you to bring that in that you're lacking, what would have to be sacrificed? And here's the other part that's super duper important. You cannot ask for anything from your partner if you are not willing to give more. I don't care how much you think you are giving. If they're not a 10 and a 10 on both things, that means they get to ask you of something too. That's super important. Because oftentimes when we want change in a relationship, we want that person to change. And then we want to give whatever we give. We don't want to give something for that person is going to ask us for. And that's all. And so that's why I want these two objective questions to be the head of the table, so that you can talk about it without so much of the emotion attached to it, and that you can clearly understand that what you're about to do is negotiate, baby. You have to come together, be honest, and resolve some conflict. In many marriages, we start becoming enemies instead of lovers. You got to stay partners.
Do come with some unrealistic expectations, right? And don't even realize that those are unrealistic.
Absolutely. But it doesn't matter how unrealistic they are when you can have a conversation about them. Like if you ask me for $1,000, I'll be like, I get that you need that now. It's just not something I can do. then it doesn't matter that that's an unrealistic expectation. What matters is that when you go telling the world how terrible I am because I didn't give you $1,000. Or you hold me responsible for not giving you the $1,000 and you never even asked for it.
Yeah.
Or you steal the $1,000 because you thought I owed it to you. You know, I mean, you know, it's the stuff that we keep in our head that harms us the most. Especially if we feel disempowered in the relationship. We may have to do our own empowerment work so we can even find the voice to have these conversations.
So at what point when you're getting into your expectations, is there a point where somebody can actually see like, ooh, I probably need to do some deeper work with somebody on this?
Well, I would tell you as a practitioner in my empowerment work, I work with a lot of people on relationships, and often, and this is just my approach, it's just one, many people, do it other ways. Many people come to me for help with their relationship, and they first ask me about couples counseling. I don't do couples counseling. At least not without first doing a whole series of counseling with the individual. Because every couple's problem is an individual problem. And so I often ask them to trust me with the process. I'm like, you do your work. And then when you do your work, you can see more authentically what is a problem with the marriage and what is the concern with other stuff that you brought into the marriage.
Okay.
And so so that's how I do couples counseling. And I say, and then when we finish this series of individual work, then we can look at the marriage and see where you are, and you'll have a better idea of how to move forward when we bring this other person in, if we bring this other person in. Most of the time, more often than not, by the time that person gets to a certain point, finish that series of individual work, they are not in need of couples counseling. Not because all the problems cease. I'm not saying it's a perfect marriage, but by then they know how to live within that unit. They know how themselves to balance their power and their importance.
Yeah, that's interesting, because usually we think of marriage that's the first thing you think, okay, couples therapy, and not so much that I as an individuals, in that marriage need to go and then really look at, okay, what did I bring to this that, is not really part of this, or that I really need to resolve within myself. Okay, so this may be off topic, so let me know if it is. Negotiating power and importance when there's a divorce and there's children involved.
That's much more difficult, because chances are a marriage ended because you could not balance power and importance. And if you could not balance it within the marriage, it's going to be even more difficult to balance it after the marriage terminates. And so it takes even more work then, because often both parties start fighting for, grappling for a sense of power and importance. So oftentimes children do get used as a pawn, especially if someone felt disempowered. And since 70% of divorces are initiated by the wife, if that spouse felt a sense of disempowerment, then she uses the power that she has often, which is her relationship with those children. People are still looking for the balance of power and importance. And so it's even more difficult to resolve after the marriage. And so then oftentimes the trust is gone and people are operating as enemies instead of partners.
Yeah, 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 unfortunately,
Unfortunately.
yeah, unfortunately. Also with that, going back to the children, managing intermarriage power importance with the children, because the children also want to feel a sense of that they want to have their power and they want to have importance too.
Absolutely. Great point to bring in too. Absolutely. Everyone in their household should feel that balance of power and importance, right? And so how do you do that with your children involved too? So you're not bringing in your children to master discipline, I hope. You're bringing in your child, your child to also continue this healthy cycle and circle and filtration of power and importance. And so in so many, the overwhelming majority of marriages, the mother ends up having a more important role in the lives of the children. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that works for you, I'm not here to tell anybody how it should look. If that works for you, then there's nothing wrong with it. But understand that. And so if the mother has a higher level of importance, then what does her level of power, how does that pull on her level of power in the relationship, and how making sure that for example, since my level as a parent now, my level of importance is so high because of these children, that I'm not leaving such a deficit that my husband now goes outside of the household to look for a level of importance. Eek. So it's important to monitor those things that are happening in your relationship. It's important that if you're for the spouse, the husband isn't so overbearing in that relationship with his show of power, that the mother now gets her power from being overbearing with the children.
And then they don't have any power. And
then they don't have any power.
Right. They don't feel like they're important and
exactly.
What are important. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, this is really something. And I do like the concepts of power and importance and working from that, because you can like easily see how that takes the emotion out of it. Okay, and so yeah, how that, and it could just be this kind of not a neutral conversation, but less emotionally charged, so we can actually get somewhere. So, Dr. Bakari, thank you so much for this conversation. And before we go, please make sure that you like this video and that you also share it.
I want to encourage people that if this conversation makes sense to you, please pick up the book 7X. These types of constructs are throughout the book, particularly each of the 7Xs. So please pick up a copy of the book. And you can find me on my website, the 7Xs Tour. And you can see where we're going next. We're always adding dates, but 7xs.com is one place where you can get updates. And also my other website, RosennaBakari.com. Just so please like, subscribe, and follow.
Yes, like, subscribe, and follow, because you are on several different platforms: Instagram, Facebook,
TikTok.
TikTok, yes, indeed. What is the one thing out of everything we've discussed? What is the one thing, if they don't take away anything else, that you want them to take away?
Learn to negotiate. There's a whole chapter of that in the 7Xs book. It's not about how you feel, it's about how you can get people to respond to how you feel. That's negotiation.
All right, that's a powerful word. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Singleton.